It was an unremarkable Tuesday evening in a small town nestled between thick woods and sprawling fields. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah sat on the couch, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug of tea. The familiar sounds of the evening surrounded her: rustling leaves, distant laughter, and the gentle hum of crickets. But then something broke the calm. A sudden, urgent knock echoed through the house. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the wind, maybe a branch tapping against the door. But then it came again, a desperate thud followed by a pitiful whimper. Confused, she exchanged glances with her husband, Mark. She whispered, her heart racing. Mark frowned, peering out the window, searching the darkness for the source. "Let me check it out," Mark said, curiosity ebbing into concern. He opened the door, and the moment he did, the strangest sight shocked him to his core. A small fox stood at their doorstep, trembling and soaked, a paw lifted as if begging for mercy. Its big, sorrowful eyes seemed to penetrate deep into his soul. This was not just any fox, it was a creature filled with pain. The fox whimpered again, causing Sarah to rush to the door, her heart pounding. She gasped, stepping outside to kneel beside the fox. The animal flinched at her approach, but its evident distress held it in place. It had a gash on its leg and maybe a scrape near its muzzle. This was no ordinary intrusion, this was a call for help. Mark asked, glancing around as if the neighbors might intervene. It was unusual, after all, to find a wild animal at your front door, especially one in such dire need. Dark thoughts crept in. What if it was rabid? What if they made things worse? But Sarah's heart twisted at the sight of the trembling animal. "We can't just leave it here," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. Mark hesitated, but something in Sarah's tone, the urgency, the compassion, pressed him to act. As Mark dashed inside to gather supplies, Sarah remained crouched down, whispering softly to the fox. "It's okay, sweetheart." The fox's eyes flickered with a hint of trust, its body slowly relaxing under her presence. Tears swelled in her eyes as she felt an unexplainable connection to this creature in distress. Here on their doorstep lay a testament to the fragility of life and the depths of isolation. Moments later, Mark returned with a clean towel and a bowl of water. They gently wrapped the fox in the towel, careful not to exacerbate its injuries, and it shivered but didn't resist. They felt its small heart racing, a creature caught between fight and flight. With a sense of purpose, they carried the fox inside, settling it on a soft blanket in the corner of their living room. The warm glow from a nearby lamp illuminated the scarred animal. It looked up at them, eyes shimmering, but there was still fear lingering behind them. "We need to get it cleaned up," Mark said, his resolve hardening. They gathered their first aid supplies, the bandages, antiseptic, and more towels, and prepared for what lay ahead. As they worked gently, Sarah spoke soothingly, trying to comfort the frightened fox. Mark methodically cleaned the wound, his hands steady despite the rush of emotions. They took turns holding the fox, each reassuring touch filled with compassion. With every bandage wrapped, their bond with the small creature deepened. An hour passed, and the world outside blurred into the background. The weight of their decision pressed on them, but they felt electric with purpose. As night fell, the glow of the living room felt like a sanctuary. The fox, who they named Finn, slowly began to relax, allowing them to care for him without fear. It was a beautiful moment, a spark of hope igniting in the stillness of their home. But the tranquil scene didn't go unnoticed. The neighbors, curious about the commotion, peeked through their windows. Conversations sparked as they whispered among themselves. "Did you see that?" It was a mix of disbelief and intrigue, an unusual occurrence stirring the small community. Tension coiled in the air. It seemed to amplify the beauty of what was unfolding within Sarah and Mark's home. The following days blurred into a whirlwind of care for Finn. As he healed, his spirit began to thrive. Mark and Sarah marveled at his progress, often catching glimpses of his playful side. He chased after bits of string, pawed at scattered crumbs, and curled up near the fireplace, basking in the warmth they offered him. Every day brought new signs of trust, a transformation that left them both in awe. With each playful leap, he seemed to thank them for their kindness. Despite their joy, the whispers from the neighbors grew louder. Some were supportive, others skeptical. The judgment lurked like a shadow, but Sarah and Mark stood firm. They had embraced the unexpected adventure, determined to defy the odds even under the scrutiny of their community. As Finn continued to heal, Mark and Sarah worked tirelessly to ensure he could transition back into the wild. They contacted wildlife rehabilitators, seeking advice on fostering him safely until he could be released. Little did they know, news of their unusual guest had spread. Soon, curious faces gathered outside their home. Children seeking adventure stood wide-eyed at their fence, glancing at the mysterious fox. Adults made inquiries, eyes filled with cautious wonder. As they worked with Finn, Sarah and Mark found themselves sharing the story of his rescue, their voices rising with pride. It was an unexpected turn. Previously private neighbors slowly transformed into a community woven together by a mutual fascination for the fox they had collectively embraced. Tension simmered among some neighbors, a sense of protectiveness clinging tightly to their hearts. One exclaimed, arms crossed and brows furrowed. Mark felt the sharp edge of the accusation, but Sarah stepped forward, her voice soothing yet resolute. "We're doing what's best for Finn." Discontent mused about their efforts, but they were undeterred. It became clear that this experience not only forged an indelible bond with Finn, but also highlighted divisions within their community. The debates about wildlife versus domesticity echoed in the shadows, reminding them this story was not merely about a fox. It was about the sometimes tense relationship between humans and nature. Weeks passed, and Finn's final day with them drew closer. The moment hung over them, bittersweet and heavy. Evening light spilled golden hues across their backyard, illuminating the lush expanse that awaited Finn. Mark and Sarah watched as he explored their yard, a newfound confidence gripping his body. The fox they rescued was no longer a wounded creature. He had transformed into a fierce embodiment of resilience. That night, as Finn snuggled by the fire for the last time, Sarah and Mark looked at each other, hope mingled with their impending loss. They had cared for this small being, bonded in a way they never imagined possible. They knew what tomorrow would bring: release, freedom, and a step into the unknown Finn's rightful place. The following afternoon, they gathered at the edge of the woods, a swirl of emotion collectively felt. Serene whispers floated through the air as they opened their arms to let him go. "This is your home now," Sarah murmured, tears tracing their way down her cheeks. Finn turned to face them, his eyes reflecting a deep understanding. With one last glance, he slipped into the dense underbrush, a striking silhouette against the sun. And as they stood there, the whispers of the neighbors faded into silence, the doubts cleared, leaving only the quiet realization that love for a creature they never anticipated meeting had brought them all together. In the stillness that remained, hearts swelled with gratitude and unity, sparking a conversation among the once divided neighbors. They were no longer judging from a distance. They were moved to consider a deeper connection with the life that shared their world. Days turned into weeks, and the story of Finn became the stuff of local legend. What began as whispers of disapproval transformed into a heartwarming tale of redemption and community. Sarah and Mark watched as families walked in the woods, children searching for traces of the fox who once curled up at their feet. They had given adventure to their neighbors and forged bonds, creating a ripple effect that altered the landscape of their small town. And at night, when the stars blanketed the sky, the gentle reminders of Finn echoed in their hearts, a legacy of kindness that illuminated their home, ensuring they would never forget the impact of a single fox knocking on their door, calling them to awaken the beauty of compassion in a world that often forgot. The night air was thick with the familiar sounds of crickets chirping, a comforting backdrop for the quiet neighborhood. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver sheen over the quaint homes. Inside one of those homes, the Johnson family sat together in their cozy living room. Laughter bounced off the walls as they played cards, the clatter of the game creating the perfect harmony of a typical Saturday night. Suddenly, a sharp, frantic knock shattered the tranquility. It wasn't the kind of knock you'd expect. It was urgent, almost desperate. Sarah, the youngest of the Johnsons, paused mid-laugh, her eyes wide. She whispered, tilting her head as if trying to catch the source of the noise. Her father, Tom, furrowed his brow, glancing at the closed door. "Probably just a raccoon or something. I'll go check," he said, his voice steady as he stood up. But as he reached for the doorknob, a soft whimper echoed from outside, making Sarah's heart race. Tom swung the door open, revealing an astonishing sight. There on the front porch stood a small fox. It was trembling and panting heavily, its bright eyes wide with fear. A deep wound bled from its side, the crimson stark against its rusty fur. The fox staggered forward, its paw raised as if it was asking for help, and let out a pitiful whine that echoed through the stillness. "Oh my God," Sarah gasped, rushing past her father and kneeling beside the injured animal. The fox looked at her, and in that moment something clicked. She saw not just an animal, she saw a wounded soul. Tom hesitated. He asked, concern etched across his face, but Sarah didn't back down. She gently reached out a hand, her eyes filled with empathy. "It's hurt, Dad." Realizing there would be no arguing with his daughter, Tom stepped forward, opening the door wider. Carefully, they cradled the fox, easing it into their living room. The warmth of the house wrapped around the creature, but it still trembled, its small body fighting against pain and fear. Inside, things moved fast. Tom grabbed old towels while Sarah poured water into a small bowl. Her mother, Lily, came rushing in from the kitchen, her hands dusted with flour from baking earlier. She asked, wide-eyed. "There's a hurt fox outside," Sarah explained, her voice steady despite her rapid heartbeat. Lily didn't hesitate. "Let's do it," she said, rummaging through a cabinet to find antiseptics and bandages. The living room became a makeshift clinic, the family focusing intensely on the injured creature. They placed the fox on a soft towel, and Sarah took a deep breath, immediately getting to work as if this moment had been her calling. As they cleaned the wound, the fox whimpered, but surprisingly didn't struggle. Each bandage wrapped around its injury seemed to heal not just its body, but also inject hope into the room. It was as if the fox understood they were there to help. Something shifted in the air. They were no longer just a family in a house. They were a small unit fighting for life. But the moment didn't go unnoticed. Outside, curious neighbors began to whisper. one neighbor remarked, peeking through drawn curtains. "Is that?" Others gasped, glancing at one another, unsure of how to react. As night fell and stars twinkled overhead, the Johnsons worked steadfastly. Tom applied a final bandage while Sarah stroked the fox's head. "You're going to be okay, buddy," she whispered, her voice soothing. The fox's eyes blinked slowly, gaining trust by the minute, but in the neighborhood unease began to simmer. "They're crazy keeping a wild animal in their house," a voice mused, tinged with judgment. The chatter grew louder, echoing the doubts of those who peeked through their windows. The Johnsons, however, were oblivious to these whispers, focused solely on their new furry friend. As days turned into weeks, Finn, the name they gave the fox, gained strength. He bounced around the living room, chasing after stray socks and playing with twinkling fairy lights. It was a pure joy to watch, and the Johnsons felt like proud parents. Finn had become an integral part of their family. Each evening they gathered around the fireplace, laughter filling the room as Finn curled at their feet, a living testament to the bond they forged. But the more Finn flourished, the more tension brewed in the neighborhood. "You can't just domesticate a wild animal," one neighbor insisted during a gathering. Despite the judgments, the Johnsons remained resolute. They had grown attached to Finn, yes, but they knew they couldn't keep him forever. Their commitment extended beyond just caring. They were preparing him for the world he belonged to, wild, untamed life. One afternoon, determined to understand more about fox rehabilitation, Sarah and Tom called a local wildlife expert named Jenna. She arrived with bags of knowledge and a warm smile that instantly put the family at ease. Jenna explained that the rehabilitation process required time and patience. "You've done a fantastic job. But now he needs to learn survival skills again." The Johnsons nodded, their hearts heavy but understanding. They were here to help Finn become who he truly was meant to be. As Finn's healing progressed, Jenna introduced the family to the idea of slowly acclimating him to the outdoors. The Johnsons began taking him into the backyard where he could roam and explore the natural world. With each venture, Finn would dart into the bushes, discovering the thrill of rustling leaves, flickering shadows, and the scent of life all around him. Neighbors watched in awe and disbelief. "I can't believe they're doing it," one whispered as they peered through the gate. There was something stunning about this graceful creature that held the community's attention. Slowly but surely, the whispers of disapproval transformed. Finn had sparked a new understanding about wildlife and compassion. Parents brought their children to catch a glimpse of him leaping through the grass, and excitement replaced skepticism. A little girl exclaimed, wide-eyed, but challenges persisted. One evening, Finn grew agitated. He paced around the yard, anxiety flickering in his eyes. Sarah instinctively crouched down, her heart pounding. She murmured, peering into the shadows. Then, as if the night itself held its breath, a distant howl reverberated through the trees, a mix of curiosity and fear coiling in the air. Tom stepped forward, his voice steady as he reassured both Sarah and Finn. They knew it was natural. He was a creature of the wild, instinctively connected to his kind. "It's okay, we're right here," he said softly. The sound resonated with Finn, urging him closer to the edge of the woods. He padded toward the line of trees, glancing back at Sarah. In that moment, they both understood a fork in the road lay before them. Should they continue to shelter him or let him embrace his nature? The following day, the Johnsons talked late into the night. They weighed the options, emotions swirling like a tempest. Finally, they arrived at the decision. Finn belonged outside. He needed to be free. With heavy hearts, they crafted a plan. They would take him to a nearby nature reserve, a lush sanctuary where he could live out his days frolicking among the trees and grass. It was bittersweet saying goodbye, but they knew it was the right choice. They wanted him to thrive, not just survive. On a bright Saturday morning, the family gathered early, the sun spilling vibrant colors across the horizon. They loaded Finn into a carrier, his bright eyes darting back and forth with curiosity. The atmosphere felt electric, the love they had for him palpable in the air. Arriving at the reserve, Sarah stepped out, her heart racing. "This is it, buddy, your new home," she whispered, opening the carrier and gently nudging him out. Finn hesitated for a moment before venturing into the unknown. The fresh scent of pine enveloped him, and he paused, looking back at the family. Tom knelt down, offering Finn a reassuring smile. "You've got this, you're strong," he murmured. And with that, Finn turned, bounding into the embrace of the wild, an echo of freedom pulling him further into the woods. Sarah clasped her hands together, tears rolling down her cheeks. It was a beautiful, powerful moment, both a goodbye and a celebration of life. Through love and compassion, they had changed a life, intertwined their fates, and built a bridge between worlds. They walked away from the reserve, the whispers of neighbors no longer echoed with doubt. The story of the Johnsons and Finn had transcended judgment. They had transformed their community, fostering a newfound appreciation for wildlife. Conversations sparked at dinner tables and parks. Curiosity flourished in the hearts of those who once questioned their choices. In the quiet moments, whenever the moon shone brightly in the summer sky, Sarah would find herself gazing into the woods, listening for the faintest rustle. A smile would break across her face, that connection lingering, a reminder of the journey they had embarked upon together. And all across town, stories about the injured fox at the Johnsons' home took root. blossoming into a legacy of kindness, connection, and understanding, an enduring reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary moments begin with an unexpected knock on the door. The night was painted in shades of blue and black, and an eerie stillness blanketed the neighborhood. Inside a modest brick home, a family of four gathered in the warmth of their living room. The flickering glow of the television illuminated their faces as they laughed and joked, completely unaware of the unusual events that were about to unfold. Just as their laughter hit a crescendo, a frantic, weak knocking resonated at the door. It wasn't the kind of knock that invites visitors. It was desperate, filled with anguish. The noise sliced through their jovial atmosphere. Tom, the father, broke his gaze from the screen and exchanged a puzzled look with his wife, Laura. He asked. The children, Lily and Max, fell silent, leaning in curiously. "Sounds like someone needs help," Laura replied, her voice laced with concern. The family instinctively moved toward the door, not knowing that within moments they would be faced with a decision that would change their lives forever. As Tom opened the door, an unexpected sight hit him hard. The small, trembling figure of a fox stood on their doorstep. Its fur was matted and stained, and it made pained whimpers as it attempted to move closer. A deep laceration marred its side, dripping with blood, the sight a brutal reminder of its anguish. "Oh no," whispered Lily, her face pale. Without thinking, she slowly stepped forward, her heart aching for the creature. Tom felt a surge of conflicting emotions: fear, concern, and an overwhelming instinct to help. "It's just a wild animal, it could be dangerous," he cautioned, but his voice wavered. The fox, eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation, took a tentative step toward them. "I don't think it wants to hurt us," Laura said softly, crouching down to meet the little animal's gaze. "It's hurt." With a determined nod, Tom stepped outside, carefully approaching the fox. "Okay, let's take it inside," he said, the protective instincts of a father overriding his doubts. They gingerly lifted the fox, feeling its small, shivering body pressing against their hands. The moment it was inside, it curled up on the floor, letting out a soft whimper that tugged at their hearts. As they laid the fox down, the family sprang into action, racing to gather towels, antiseptic, and bandages. Every second felt crucial. Lily grabbed her favorite blanket and draped it over the fox, as if to provide it warmth and comfort. "We need to be gentle," she whispered to her brother, who stood nearby, wide-eyed and frozen. In that moment, laughter was replaced by urgency. Tom's hands moved deftly to clean the wound, while Laura held the fox still, her voice calming. "You're going to be okay," she murmured softly as adrenaline surged through the room. Each bandage wrapped around the fox felt like a small victory, a step closer to healing its wounded spirit. Minutes felt like hours, each moment steeped in tension, but the fox began to respond. The tremors gradually subsided, and it looked up at them with grateful eyes. Just then, the faint sound of whispering began to echo from outside, neighbors watching from their windows, eyes wide as they witnessed the unusual scene unfold. The Johnsons knew their actions were raising eyebrows, but the urgency of the moment silenced any concerns about the judgments of those who lived nearby. But when they finally stepped back to observe their work, a mix of pride and uncertainty washed over them. Had they made the right choice? Could a wild animal truly be brought inside their home? As the fox nestled into the blanket, a new kind of bond began to form. Tom and Laura kept it calm, offering small bits of food and water, catching glimpses of its playful, curious nature hidden beneath the layers of fear. They decided to name it Finn. Each day that passed brought new challenges, yet also unexpected joys. Finn transformed the atmosphere of their home, turning their focus from worries and skepticism to the wonder of nurturing life. They constructed a small sleeping area for him in the corner, filled with all the warmth they could offer. Meanwhile, the community outside watched curiously, whispered one neighbor, peering through a partially open curtain. Murmurs filled the air. Yet while some spoke in concern, others were enchanted by the story unfolding before them. Inside the Johnson home, days morphed into weeks. Finn flourished under their care, gradually shedding the pain he came with. Max and Lily would gently play with him, throwing bits of fabric for him to chase. He jumped and flipped, startling them all with bursts of energy they hadn't expected. Laughter filled the spaces where doubt once lingered. But along with joy came tension. The growing conflict around their unconventional choice brewed outside their door. With whispers turning to comments, not all the reactions were supportive. One neighbor warned as she passed by the yard, "What if he gets aggressive?" The weight of those words hung heavy, but Tom and Laura stood firm. They had come to see Finn not just as a wild animal, but as part of their family. They knew they needed to prepare him for a future beyond their walls, but how? It nagged at them, an unspoken reality they had to face. Tom decided to reach out to a local wildlife rehabilitation center. The call was filled with anticipation and anxiety. "We have a fox that we rescued, and we want to ensure he makes it back into the wild," he asked. The voice on the other end was warm and encouraging. "Absolutely." With renewed hopes, Tom and Laura began transitioning Finn to outdoor life. They set up a safe space in their backyard, fenced off, where he could explore without venturing too far. With each outing, the family closely monitored him, easing the tension and fear with every little success. Finn dashed around, investigating every corner of the grassy area, and gradually he became more comfortable in his surroundings. But Finn's new life wasn't without its complications. One day, as the family sat outside, they heard an unusual rustling coming from the neighbor's yard. Glancing over, they spotted two other foxes, vibrant and free. Fear gripped Lily as she pointed. But before they could find their breath, Finn's instincts kicked in. He strutted confidently toward the newcomers, tail held high, and to their relief, playfulness ensued. The neighborhood watched, hearts collectively suspended, as nature took its course. Days turned into weeks of introducing Finn to the outside world, and the Johnsons had crafted a routine that made inclusion feel seamless. Neighbors began to understand. They watched Finn flourish, and slowly skepticism shifted toward admiration. Maybe this was meant to be, Tom's coworker remarked one afternoon, embracing an idea that once seemed implausible. But the inevitable weighed heavy on the Johnsons, the moment they would have to let Finn go entirely. A distinguished wildlife biologist from the local rehabilitation center set a date to release him back into a safe natural habitat. The news filled them with mixed emotions, elation and sorrow intertwined. On the day of the release, the sun shone brightly, illuminating the journey ahead. They arrived at the reserve, Finn snuggled in a carrier, his eyes wide with curiosity. Sarah and Max each held a corner of the carrier, and Tom and Laura walked beside them, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. As they opened the door, Finn took a moment, sniffing the air, absorbing the wilderness surrounding him. Finally, he stepped out cautiously, the wild beckoning him with open arms. The family held their breath, a tender silence settling as Finn took his first true steps. They watched as he surveyed his surroundings, much like a child finally stepping onto the playground for the first time. Tom reached out, placing a hand on Laura's shoulder, her eyes shimmering with tears. "It's okay," he reassured her. Finn paused, looking back at them one last time, and for a heartbeat, everything felt still. And then, with one final leap, he dashed into the underbrush, disappearing into the thicket that would be his new home. As the family walked back to their car, their hearts felt heavy yet strangely liberated. They had changed the life of a wild creature, and in doing so, they had transformed their own lives and their community. Days turned into weeks, and soon their home found a new normal, yet the echoes of Finn remained. Neighbors who once whispered in judgment now came to Tom and Laura, seeking advice about wildlife friendships and creatures that sought comfort. At local gatherings, Finn's story became a symbol of compassion, sparking conversations and connections among families. Every now and then, when the moon rose full and bright, the Johnsons would gather in their living room, reminiscing, laughter bouncing off the walls. They missed Finn, but they found peace in knowing he lived on, wild and free. In those quiet evening moments, the family would wonder, was he out there, chasing shadows under the stars? With a heart still full of love, they felt the glow of their bond transcending the boundaries of walls and fences, a testament to the power of empathy and courage in the most unexpected places. And somewhere in the depths of those woods, Finn thrived, a reminder that sometimes the most remarkable moments begin with a knock on the door, changing lives forever. The moon hung low and full, casting bright beams of silvery light across the quiet suburban street. Inside the Johnson home, laughter and chatter filled the air as the family gathered around the dining table, savoring the remnants of their dinner. Tom and Laura reminisced about their weekend while their children, Max and Lily, teased each other playfully. Suddenly, a sharp knock interrupted their revelry. It was loud, almost frantic, a stark contrast to the warmth of their evening. Max asked, his grin fading into confusion. Tom stood up and walked to the door, curiosity mixed with concern. "Hang tight, I'll check it out," he said, opening the door just a crack. The sight that greeted him made his heart race. A small fox stood trembling on the porch, its fur bristled and matted, eyes wide with fear. A deep gash ran along its side, blood seeping through the thick brown fur. It whimpered softly, a heart-wrenching sound that echoed through the night. "Oh my God," Tom breathed, instinctively crouching down to get a closer look. The poor creature was clearly hurt and scared, and it was clear that it needed immediate help. Without even thinking, he stepped outside, drawn to the fox as if it was calling out to him. Laura called out, hastening to his side. The moment she saw the fox, her breath caught in her throat. "Is it?" "Yeah, it looks like it's been injured," Tom responded, a rush of determination flooding his heart. With the urgency of a man who couldn't turn away from a life in need, he gently scooped up the fox in his arms. It trembled violently but didn't resist. The family huddled together, their hearts racing in unison as they hurried back inside, anxiously sensing the weight of the moment. "We need to clean it up," Laura said, her voice firm as she looked around the room for supplies. Max and Lily watched, wide-eyed, as their parents sprang into action. The warmth of their home contrasted sharply with the bleeding, trembling creature they had brought inside. In the kitchen, they rummaged through drawers, gathering towels and antiseptic, while Laura poured a bowl of water. Every movement felt like a race against time. Tom's hands shook slightly as he worked. This was not just an animal they were saving. It was a symbol of vulnerability, a direct call to compassion. Tom laid the fox down on a towel on the kitchen counter, its small body barely moving. "Stay calm, buddy," he murmured, trying to keep a soothing tone. He carefully examined the animal, feeling the warmth of life still pulsing beneath its fur. As Tom cleaned the wound, the fox let out pitiful whines that pierced through the air. Max scrunched his face, unable to bear the sound. He squeaked, stepping closer to Laura. "We're doing our best, honey," Laura replied, her heart aching. The emotions swirling in the kitchen created a palpable tension. Every moment felt layered with significance. With skillful determination, Tom stitched up the wound, the foreign concept of a family working together to save a wild creature becoming their reality. When the final bandage was in place, Finn, the name they decided on, looked up at them, eyes swirling with confusion but also a hint of trust. The family paused, enveloped in hope. They had managed to help this tiny creature, but at what cost? How long could they keep him? Outside, the neighborhood watched from their windows, whispers rippling through the night like the wind. One neighbor murmured, her brow furrowing as she peered through the curtains. As the days passed, Finn grew stronger under the Johnsons' care. The kiddos took turns holding him, their laughter mingling with the gentle sounds of the fox exploring the house. He chased after stray socks and nibbled on bits of food, becoming more playful by the hour. But as Finn flourished, so did the tension brewing in the neighborhood. "It's not safe for your kids," one neighbor insisted, arms crossed as she stood by the fence. Tom and Laura stood firm, unyielding against the waves of skepticism crashing around them. They saw the joy Finn brought to their home and felt the deep connection that bound them to him. Each day spent nurturing him felt like a chance to stand up for the innocent. Soon, Finn was exploring the backyard, dashing between the trees with a growing confidence. The neighbors began to peek over the fence, some astonished, while others were quick to raise their voices in concern. "You're encouraging a wild animal to depend on you," one neighbor scolded, casting a wary glance at Finn, but the Johnsons pushed back. "He's part of our family now," Laura proclaimed, her voice steady. Every time they spoke of their decision to care for Finn, it felt like a declaration of defiance against societal norms. As the weeks rolled on, the connection deepened. Finn began to regard the family as his pack, instinctively following them as they moved about. They created a small, fortified area in the backyard where Finn could roam safely, but where they could also teach him the skills to survive on his own. Each outing revealed his natural instincts, how he crouched low to the ground, how he played, and how he explored. Slowly, the whispers outside began to shift. More than mere judgment, curiosity took root among the neighbors. They found themselves enchanted by Finn's antics, the way he darted and leapt through the grass. A neighbor's child asked, eyes wide as they began to see the beauty in this unusual bond. Max shouted, excitement bubbling over. The family began to open their doors wider, not just to Finn, but to their community too. One sunny afternoon, a group of children gathered in the backyard, their laughter intertwining with the rustle of leaves. Finn bounded around them, joining in on the joy. The neighbors, who once stood on the sidelines, were now drawn into the warmth radiating from the Johnson home. Even those who had voiced unease began to soften, realizing that love can thrive in unexpected places. But the Johnsons knew that Finn's journey was not complete. He needed more than just comfort. He needed to learn how to survive on his own in a world filled with danger. After discussing with local wildlife experts, they made a plan. It was time to prepare Finn for his future in the wild. With the help of a wildlife rescue organization, they started the next phase of Finn's transition. They created an outdoor enclosure, a space where he could explore and gain the skills he would need. While this felt right, an undercurrent of sadness tugged at their hearts. They'd be letting go of something they had come to cherish deeply. As Finn roamed wild-eyed through his enclosure, the Johnsons would spend hours sharing their lives with him. They taught him how to hunt with small bits of food, encouraging him to chase and pounce, igniting old instincts buried deep within him. And the community continued to engage, watching as their unlikely town saga unfolded, a story not of fear, but of friendship and understanding. But just when they thought everything was falling into place, the stakes went higher. One evening, as twilight draped the neighborhood in shadows, the sound of urgent barking echoed through the yard. Finn bolted up, ears perked, and rushed to the fence. The darkness came alive with the presence of another fox, strong, wild, and alluring. The Johnsons watched with bated breath as Finn's instincts kicked into overdrive. He ran to the edge of the fence, his heart racing. Lily gasped, her eyes wide with anxiety. Tom stepped closer, trying to calm everyone down. "We let him be who he is." As Finn danced along the edge of the fence, caught in the pull of his wild instincts, the world dimmed around them. This wasn't just a test of his strength, it was a reminder of where he belonged, a world that beckoned him home. The wild fox at the fence called to him. With a final glance back at the Johnsons, Finn made the leap. He darted into the night, blending with the shadows, a fleeting shape marking the threshold of his transformation. And then silence enveloped the air. The Johnsons stood together in the dim light, emotions swirling, joy intertwined with heartache. Finn was gone, free to embrace his wild destiny, yet the space he left behind felt unbearable. Days passed and the neighborhood buzzed with questions. People would ask, yet the Johnsons stood proud. They had done the right thing. Weeks later, whispers turned into stories of hope and curiosity. With each recounting, the town began to transform. Families were inspired, drawn together by a shared story of compassion. Children learned to respect wildlife rather than fear it, and in a world often divided by judgment, the Johnsons became a symbol of unity, a family who answered the call of a wild creature in need. Looking back on what had transpired, Tom and Laura felt a sense of fulfillment. They had opened their doors not only to Finn, but to the emotions that connected them all. The act of kindness blurred the lines of fear, showing that love can transcend even the wildest of things. In the heart of the woods, Finn thrived alive and free under the starlit sky. And though life would never be the same again for the Johnson family, they had become closer than ever, forever marked by the extraordinary journey they had embarked on together. A journey that began with a simple knock on the door, forever changing their understanding of family, community, and the wild spirit that flows through all living things. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the quiet street. Families settled into their evening routines, laughter spilling from open windows where children played in backyards. Inside the Martin household, all seemed serene as Sarah and David shared a quiet moment on the couch while their two kids, Emily and Jake, busied themselves at the dining room table with crayons and coloring books. Suddenly, a soft but frantic knock echoed through the stillness of the evening. It wasn't a normal knock, a casual visitor's tap, but a vigorous pounding that seemed almost desperate. Emily looked up, eyes wide with curiosity. She asked, the pencil in her hand pausing mid-stroke. David glanced at Sarah, confusion flickering across his face. "I'll check it out," he said, trying to brush off the growing knot in his stomach. As he stood up, the kids fidgeted with excitement, sharing a look that only siblings could understand. Jake asked, his voice small yet eager. "Stay here, buddy. I'll be right back," David reassured him. There was a mix of dread and intrigue gnawing at him as he approached the door. As he opened it, a sight met him that he would never forget. A small fox stood on the porch, trembling and visibly injured. Its fur was matted, and it had a deep gash along its side, blood oozing from the wound, painting the porch floor in red. The fox looked up at David with wide, pleading eyes, letting out a soft, sorrowful whimper that cut through the stillness. "Oh my God," David gasped, instinctively crouching down to get a better look. The fox staggered forward, its body quivering as it tried to move closer. Heart pounding in his chest, David felt a rush of empathy flood over him. This wasn't just an animal, it was a wounded soul asking for help. He called back inside, urgency rising in his voice. Sarah rushed to the door, her heart sinking when she saw the state of the fox. "Oh no," she exclaimed, moving closer. The children peered around their mother, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. "We have to help it," David said, determination lacing his words. He turned to Sarah, who nodded in agreement, her maternal instincts kicking in. The fox whined again, its body trembling, and David felt an inexplicable connection to the animal, as if they both shared an understanding of pain. As the family brought the fox inside, they worked quickly. The adrenaline surged through them, their living room transformed into an impromptu animal clinic. Sarah grabbed old towels while David scoured the first aid kit, his hands shaking slightly with urgency. Emily and Jake watched, wide-eyed, feeling the weight of the moment and the gravity of what they were doing. Jake asked, worry etched on his face. "It's going to be okay, buddy. We're going to help him," Sarah said softly, her voice steady. The kids moved closer, curious and concerned, yet filled with a sense of purpose. The moment was surreal. With every touch of cotton and antiseptic, they worked together as a family to heal a creature that had wandered into their lives. David cleaned the wound carefully, feeling the warmth of the fox's body as it flinched under the sting of the antiseptic. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, not just for the fox, but for the realization of how fragile life could be. "He's so scared," she whispered, reaching out a small hand to stroke the fox's fur. The simple act of kindness seemed to calm it, and for the first time since entering their home, the fox looked relieved. Minutes felt like hours, but the Johnsons managed to bandage the wound, each bandage wrapped around the fox symbolizing hope. They decided to name him Finn, a name that felt like it belonged to him. As they took a step back to admire their work, they heard a rustling sound outside. The neighbors had begun to gather at their fences, hesitant but curious. Murmurs of disbelief and concern floated through the night air. One neighbor whispered, but the Johnsons didn't care. They had made their choice. Finn was part of their family now, and they poured their hearts into caring for him. Days turned into weeks, and Finn flourished under their care. They constructed a cozy corner in the living room for him, filled with soft blankets where he could rest. The children delighted in watching him explore every inch of the house. Finn quickly became a playful spirit, darting after stray socks and curling up at their feet during movie nights. While the Johnsons warmed to their new family member, the neighborhood was buzzing with a mix of admiration and skepticism. Some neighbors were enchanted, amused at the sight of a fox chasing a ball, while others couldn't shake the feeling that this was a bad idea. A concerned neighbor warned at a casual barbecue. One evening, the tension boiled over then. A group of neighbors gathered to voice their concerns to Laura. "Keeping that fox is risky," one lady exclaimed, arms crossed. Laura took a deep breath, her heart pounding, but she held her ground. "He's not just a wild animal, he's part of our family. We care for him and we are teaching him how to survive in the wild," she replied, conviction ringing in her voice. But even as she spoke, doubts crept in. Every night as she sat on the couch with Tom, the sound of Finn playing in the background brought them both joy and anxiety. How long could this last? What would happen when Finn no longer needed them? Determined to give Finn the best chance at independence, the Johnsons reached out to wildlife experts. They learned that the best way to prepare him for release would be to gradually acclimate him to the outdoors, allowing him to explore while still providing the safety of their home. One Monday morning, they decided it was time to set the plan into motion. They set up a safe, enclosed space in their backyard where Finn could roam freely. The enclosure was sturdy, a small haven where he could chase leaves and dig in the dirt, and it became a refuge for the fox who had brought so much joy to their household. As the weeks progressed, the family noticed something incredible happening. Finn began to embrace his instincts. He chased butterflies, darted in and out of the grass, and even gave them little displays of his playful nature. The children laughed and cheered him on as if he were the star of a show. The neighborhood watched closely. People began breaking the line of suspicion and formed connections. Some children asked with bright eyes, excitement bubbling over. The Johnsons welcomed them, sharing stories about Finn's journey and the importance of kindness to all creatures. But just when the community began to see Finn in a different light, the stakes rose. One night, as they were settling down for bed, an anguished howl filled the air. Finn perked up, ears straight and alert. Instinct kicked in, and he rushed to the fence, looking into the shadows of the woods. Jake whispered, a tremor in his voice, "It's okay." "He's just responding to something in the wild," Tom assured, though he couldn't shake the worry that curled in his gut. Finn's newfound friends were nearby, calling him in the dark, and the fence separated them from reconnecting. It was a moment none of them could have prepared for, the weight of the choice they had made intersecting with nature's call for freedom. The next morning, they opened the door cautiously, hoping for the best but fearing the unexpected. Finn remained in his area, looking restless, pacing back and forth. "Maybe he's ready to join them," Sarah suggested cautiously, an idea forming in her mind. David nodded slowly. The family spent the day discussing Finn's future and their love for him. The weight of their decision loomed heavy, knowing that it was time to set their little fox free. Finn had given them so much, perhaps it was time to return the favor. That evening, a small group of neighbors gathered in the backyard, curious about the fabled fox they had all come to know. Emily and Jake stood by Finn, their hearts heavy with impending loss. Jake asked, his voice a mixture of hope and sadness. "I think he will," Emily assured him, her eyes shimmering with tears. The moment was bittersweet, filled with shared laughter and whispered stories of Finn's adventures. The backyard turned into a sanctuary of memories, where they congratulated their little fox on the journey he would soon undertake. As darkness settled in and the stars began to twinkle, they prepared to release Finn. With one final look, Tom knelt down. "This is where you belong, buddy," he said softly, opening the gate gently. Finn paused, glancing back at his family, and for a moment it felt as if time stood still. Then, with a flash of rust-colored fur and a flick of his tail, Finn dashed into the night. The family stood in silence, hearts breaking yet swelling with pride. They had given Finn a fighting chance at life, and he was finally free to be the wild creature he was meant to be. In the days that followed, life turned quieter. The Johnsons adjusted to the absence of Finn, living in the silence that his playful antics had filled. But the memories lingered, vibrant and alive. As if the universe conspired to show them all that love transcends all boundaries, Finn made occasional returns nights filled with the gentle rustling of grass, glimpses of movement in the moonlight. Though he was wild, a part of him resonated within them. The neighborhood evolved too. The story of Finn became a vital part of the community, encouraging conversations about wildlife safety and inspiring families to appreciate the beauty in nature. The Johnsons welcomed their neighbors with open arms, transforming skepticism into understanding. They learned that compassion could bridge gaps and connect hearts. Maybe Finn hadn't just changed their lives, but through his story, he had breathed a new sense of unity into the neighborhood. As seasons changed and time passed, the Johnsons would often gather and reminisce about Finn. They'd tell tales of his courage, his spirit, and how a simple act of kindness stitched them all together in unexpected ways. They learned something essential, that love can heal, even in the wildest of ways, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to let go. And as they sat together, the warmth of the moment enveloping them, they knew that somewhere out there, Finn was thriving, a testament to the fact that love doesn't just belong in homes, it thrives wherever it's nurtured. Sometimes it knocks on the door, carrying the promise of adventure and connection, and sometimes it sets you free. It was a quiet weekend evening in a small suburban neighborhood, the kind where the sounds of laughter and conversation floated through the warm air. Inside the Thompson home, the scent of homemade pizza wafted through the kitchen as Jennifer tossed a salad, her husband Mike setting the table for their two kids, Emma and Jake. Lively chatter filled the room as the family planned their upcoming vacation, discussing possible destinations and fun activities. Suddenly, a series of sharp knocks broke the cozy atmosphere, echoing through the house. The children paused, their forks freezing midair. Emma asked, her voice a mixture of curiosity and concern. "I don't know," Mike replied, tightening his grip on the pizza cutter. He set down the pizza and made his way to the door, glancing back at Jennifer, who had a worried look on her face. As he opened the door, a startled gasp escaped his lips. There on their porch stood a small fox, its fur matted and dirty. A deep gash ran along its side, and it whimpered softly, its body trembling as it looked up at him with pleading eyes. The sight was striking a creature so wild and yet so vulnerable, caught between fear and desperation. "Oh my God," Mike muttered, stepping back in shock. The fox staggered forward, a pitiful whine escaping its throat. He whispered, instinctively crouching down, drawn to the fragile being before him. Jennifer rushed to his side, her heart dropping as she took in the scene. She exclaimed, dread washing over her. Without hesitating, the couple made a quick decision. Mike urged, his voice steady. The kids, wide-eyed and anxious, stood in the doorway, caught between fascination and fear. Emma took a step forward, her heart aching for the injured animal. She asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, sweetie, we all can," Jennifer said, her nurturing instincts kicking in. With a silent understanding, the family formed a small unit of action. Mike carefully lifted the fox into his arms, feeling its small, quivering body against him. "Let's take him inside," he said, and together they ushered the fox into their home, a sanctuary where they hoped it could find solace from the pain. The warmth of the living room wrapped around them, contrasting sharply with the vulnerability of the creature they had just taken in. As they set the fox down on an old blanket in the corner, Jake knelt beside it, all mingling with concern. He asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "We'll clean its wounds and keep it safe until we can get help," Jennifer explained, her heart pounding as she pulled herself together. Working quickly, Mike gathered the first aid supplies while Jennifer prepared warm water and a cloth. The kids watched intently, tension weaving through the air. The room felt alive with urgency and fear, but also a flicker of hope. As they carefully washed the fox's wound, it flinched but didn't pull away. There was something almost magical about that moment. They were a family helping a creature in need, bridging the gap between human and animal, fear and hope. By the time they had bandaged the injury, the fox, now affectionately named Finn, seemed more relaxed, though the tension still hung thick in the air. Little did they know their actions were not going unnoticed. Outside, windows began to fill with curious faces, neighbors peering out, some with worry etched on their brows, others with intrigue. One whispered to another, skepticism blending with curiosity. As the night wore on, Finn began to settle down, exhaustion overtaking his body. The children nestled next to him, taking turns petting his soft fur, filling their home with laughter mixed with gasps of awe. Each connection felt sacred, the bond they were forging felt significant, but outside the whispers grew louder. One neighbor exclaimed at a gathering the next day. Meanwhile, others questioned the sanity of allowing a wild creature into a home filled with children. They really should call animal control before it's too late, another added darkly. Back inside, the Thompsons were too busy caring for Finn to notice the mounting concern in their community. Every day felt like a small victory. Finn began to thrive in their care. He chased toys around the living room, developing a playful side that captivated everyone in the family. However, as Finn adapted, so too did the tension outside. Neighbors began to gather more often, curiosity dragging them from their homes and into the cool evening air. Interest deepened, transforming from judgment into a blend of fascination and admiration as they watched the family nurture the little creature. One evening during a small gathering, a neighbor voiced the concerns compelling him to speak up. He asked, his brows furrowed. "What happens when it gets bigger?" Mike stood firm, shaking his head. "We've done our research. Finn is learning to trust us, which is crucial for his recovery." This reassurance seemed to bridge the gap between skepticism and understanding, and some neighbors nodded slowly, beginning to accept this extraordinary choice the Thompsons had made. However, one fateful evening changed everything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, Finn grew restless. He paced around the living room, looking out the window toward the woods behind their house. A low growl echoed in the distance, sending shivers down Jennifer's spine. She whispered, her heart racing. Finn's instincts were kicking in, a primal response he couldn't ignore. The fox darted to the door, desperate to explore the world outside, longing for the wild that lurked just beyond the fence. "Maybe he senses something," Emma suggested, her voice barely above a murmur. Mike exchanged glances with Jennifer, the heavy silence settling between them. It felt like a tipping point, a moment of reckoning where they had to decide what to do next. The world they had created around Finn in their home stood in contrast to the wild world into which he truly belonged. That night they gathered the family together. The weight of their decision hung heavily in the air as they discussed Finn's future. "We have loved him, but he belongs outside," Mike said softly. The children's faces clouded with confusion and a hint of sadness. Jake protested. "I know, son," Jennifer replied, her voice thick with emotion, "but think about what it means for him to be free." With heavy hearts, they prepared for Finn's eventual release. They built an outdoor pen in their yard, a safe space that would help him transition back to the wild. They filled it with elements of nature, logs to climb, grass to frolic in, and space to roam. In this pen, Finn could grow stronger and regain the instincts that had been stifled during his time with them. Days passed, and though Finn adapted to the pen, the Thompsons felt the growing distance between them. They would spend hours sitting outside, watching him, sharing the laughter that once filled their living room, now marked by the bittersweet knowledge of impending separation. One day, while playing with him in the pen, Finn suddenly darted to the edge, facing the woods. His body tensed, and in that moment, it felt like the entire world paused. The call of the wild danced around him, and it was clear he was ready. That evening, the family gathered in the backyard for a final goodbye. Their hearts were heavy with emotion, filled with cherished memories of the little fox who had come into their lives so unexpectedly. "Thank you for everything, Finn," Emma whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves around them, almost as if the world was echoing her sentiment. With the sun setting behind them, casting a warm glow over the yard, Mike opened the gate of the pen. Finn paused for a moment, glancing back at the family, his bright eyes reflecting their love. Then, with a burst of energy, he raced into the woods, blending into the shadows, becoming one with the wild he was always meant to be. The Thompsons stood together, tears flowing freely as they watched him disappear into the trees, a mix of heartbreak and pride swelling within them. They had given Finn the gift of freedom, an act filled with love that would forever bond them in ways they could have never imagined. In the days that followed, the Thompsons adjusted to the silence that filled their home. While Finn was gone, they held on to the lessons he imparted. They learned about connection, love, and the importance of letting go. The walls of their home echoed with laughter and memories as they shared stories of Finn with family and friends. Meanwhile, the neighbors who had once doubted the family's decision began to view the Thompsons differently. They saw the impact Finn had on their lives and were inspired to rethink their attitudes toward wildlife. What began as judgment transformed into understanding, a lesson in compassion and empathy. As the seasons changed, whispers of Finn turned into stories shared at gatherings. One neighbor exclaimed. The community began to embrace a newfound connection with nature, sharing respect for the wildlife that surrounded them. The Thompsons felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing their experience had transformed not just their family, but also their entire neighborhood. They had taught everyone that sometimes the most meaningful bonds come from embracing and respecting the wild, allowing them the space to thrive. And in the heart of the woods, Finn was out there, alive and free under the stars. Whenever the wind rustled through the trees, Jennifer would smile, remembering the fox who knocked on their door crying, forever changing their lives. In his freedom, he carried a piece of their love, echoing back to them in ways they would cherish forever. The evening was calm, shrouded in a soft twilight glow as the sun dipped beyond the horizon. The Johnsons were curled up in their cozy living room, laughter mingling with the sounds of an old movie playing on the television. It was an ordinary evening, filled with the comfort of family and the simple joy of sharing stories. Sarah, the mother, sipped her tea while her husband, Mark, playfully ruffled their son Jake's hair, eliciting a burst of giggles from him and his little sister, Lily. Then it came, a sudden, frantic knock at the door. It was so loud and insistent that it startled them, the sound slicing through their laughter like a jagged edge. Sarah asked, her voice tinged with confusion. "I don't know," Mark replied, exchanging a bewildered glance with Sarah. "Stay here." With hesitance and a flicker of concern, he walked toward the door, the atmosphere thickening with an unspoken tension. The kids shifted in their seats, curiosity urging them to follow their dad. As Mark opened the door, a chilling sight met his eyes. A small fox stood on the porch, trembling and covered in dirt. Its fur was matted, and a crimson gash ran along its sides, seeping blood onto their welcome mat. The fox whimpered, looking up at him with wide, scared eyes that held an almost human-like desperation. "Holy smokes," Mark breathed, instinctively crouching down. The sight of the injured creature triggered something primal within him, a mix of empathy and protective instinct. Sarah joined him at the doorway, her hands instinctively covering her mouth in shock. She exclaimed, stepping closer. Jake asked, his voice trembling with concern, his eyes locked on the fox. "Of course we can," Mark replied. He knelt down further, extending a cautious hand toward the animal. The fox flinched but didn't retreat. Sarah shouted to the kids, already filled with determination. The children scrambled into action, uncertainty fading into urgency. Mark scooped the fox into his arms, feeling the small heartbeat against him as they rushed inside. Once they were safely back in their living room, the family sprang into action, their sanctuary transforming into a makeshift clinic. "We need warm water," Sarah said, grabbing a bowl from the kitchen. In the back of her mind, she was aware of the curious glances from the neighbors who had emerged to witness the unusual scene unfolding. As Mark gently laid Finn as they decided to name the fox on an old blanket in the corner, anxiety and hope filled the air like a thick fog. The family gathered around, quick to assess the injuries. Mark murmured, inspecting it closely. He knew they had to act fast, every second counted. They worked quickly, using warm water and cloths to clean the wound. Finn whimpered and squirmed, but with each gentle touch, he seemed to relax a bit more, sensing that they meant no harm. "Just a little more, buddy," Mark whispered, his own heart racing for the tiny creature. They bandaged the cut with the care of a family tending to one of their own. The deeper they went into the task, the tighter the bond grew between human and animal, this vivid reminder of fragility that lingered in the air. Lily asked, her voice threaded with worry. "It has to be," Sarah replied, her eyes locked on the fox. As Finn settled on the blanket, the family shared a moment of exhausted relief. The air felt lighter, perhaps they had made a difference after all. The fox looked up at them, eyes now filled with a glimmer of trust. Outside, however, a different narrative was brewing. As the Johnsons tended to Finn, neighbors whispered in shock and disbelief. One neighbor scoffed, arms folded across her chest. Another countered, but it needed help. The discussion stirred tension, the juxtaposition of compassion and skepticism brewing just beyond the Johnsons' walls. Days turned into weeks as the family devoted themselves to Finn's recovery. They learned to create a routine, carefully monitoring his progress while also teaching their children the value of kindness and responsibility. Each day was met with new challenges, but the love they poured into caring for this animal heightened their family bond in ways they never expected. Finn began responding well to their care. He played with the children, chasing after small toys and curling up next to them in the warmth of the living room. The transformation was astonishing. It was as if joy had been brought alive in that little fox, and the Johnsons were overjoyed to witness it. But outside, the murmurs had shifted into resentment. More neighbors became concerned, armed with opinions. One shouted from the street as they mowed their lawn. Mark stood firm in his conviction, explaining their beliefs about wildlife. "He's not some wild animal we're keeping as a pet. We'll release him when he's ready," he insisted. But with each new comment thrown over the fence, doubt tickled at the edges of his resolve. One crisp autumn afternoon, Finn's instincts began to re-emerge. As he explored the backyard, his body grew more relaxed. He chased butterflies and pounced on leaves, exuding a newfound confidence. The kids watched wide-eyed, cheering on their little friend. Jake shouted while Lily clapped her hands in delight. The family had managed to carve a little piece of happiness for Finn, his presence filling their home with warmth and laughter. Yet darker clouds began to gather amid the euphoria. One fateful night, with the wind howling loudly outside, Finn grew restless. He paced back and forth, growling softly as shadows danced across the backyard. Sarah wondered aloud, anxiety creeping into her voice. "He's sensing something," Mark replied, sensing the change in Finn. As Mark stepped closer to the door, he suddenly noticed movement outside, the unmistakable shape of another fox, dark and sleek, lurking at the edge of their yard. Finn froze, a tense stillness gripping him as he stared out into the dark. Jake asked, worry creeping into his expression. "Not yet," Mark replied hesitantly. But then Finn darted toward the door, scratching at it with urgency. His instincts were clearly taking over. The call of the wild had grown louder, reverberating through his very being. With a rush of adrenaline, he whined, urging them to open the door. "Maybe we should," Sarah whispered, her heart aching at the thought of holding Finn back from his true nature. Behind them, the house fell silent as a profound realization settled in. They had nurtured a wild spirit, one that belonged to the woods and not to their home. It felt like everything moved in slow motion as Mark stepped forward hesitantly, sensing the weight of the moment. Then, with a gentle push, he opened the door and Finn bolted outside, disappearing into the darkness like a flicker of light extinguished in the night. The Johnsons stood frozen, breaths caught in their throats. They had let him go, but could they really? The relief was tinged with despair. The following days were a haze of emotional turmoil. As they tried to adjust, each time they heard a rustle or a howl outside, their hearts raced, memories flashing before their eyes. What if they had made a mistake? What if he got hurt again? They braved the outdoors, calling Finn's name, hoping for a response, but the woods remained silent, the darkness swallowing their hopeful cries. Days passed, and the house felt emptier without his playful presence, the laughter now a haunting echo. But then, just as their hope began to wane, one morning they awoke to something incredible. Loud, joyful barks echoed through their front yard. The family rushed outside, hearts pounding as they were met with a sight they would never forget. Finn stood proudly at their doorstep, but he wasn't alone. He was flanked by a group of wild foxes, sleek and wild, their eyes glimmering under the morning sun. "Look." Lily yelled, joy erupting. But as the family enjoyed the moment, a nagging thought pulled at the edges of Mark's mind. This was amazing, yes, but it also signified change. The wild call had returned, accompanied by wild companions. The neighborhood, witnessing the scene unfold, began to whisper again. Someone muttered, casting glances filled with a mix of awe and worry. Mike knelt down, drawing closer to Finn. He called out, but as Finn approached, something flickered in his eyes, a blend of belonging and wildness that sent a shiver down Mark's spine. Was this how it was meant to be? Would Finn choose the wild over the love they had nurtured at home? With a bittersweet heart, the family felt the thrust of inevitability. Customs and boundaries were being rewritten right before their eyes. And there they stood in a now familiar backyard, surrounded by both love and uncertainty, as the line between domesticity and the wild blurred further. The tension hung like a storm cloud above them, questions lingering in their minds. What would happen next? Could they keep him? Would he choose to stay with them, or was the call of the wild too strong to ignore? The answers seemed just out of reach, swirling in the summer air. The evening was calm, shrouded in a soft twilight glow as the sun dipped beyond the horizon. The Johnsons were curled up in their cozy living room, laughter mingling with the sounds of an old movie playing on the television. It was an ordinary evening, filled with the comfort of family and the simple joy of sharing stories. Sarah, the mother, sipped her tea while her husband, Mark, playfully ruffled their son Jake's hair, eliciting a burst of giggles from him and his little sister, Lily. Then it came, a sudden, frantic knock at the door. It was so loud and insistent that it startled them, the sound slicing through their laughter like a jagged edge. Sarah asked, her voice tinged with confusion. "I don't know," Mark replied, exchanging a bewildered glance with Sarah. "Stay here." With hesitance and a flicker of concern, he walked toward the door, the atmosphere thickening with an unspoken tension. The kids shifted in their seats, curiosity urging them to follow their dad. As Mark opened the door, a chilling sight met his eyes. A small fox stood on the porch, trembling and covered in dirt. Its fur was matted, and a deep gash ran along its side, seeping blood onto their welcome mat. The fox whimpered, looking up at him with wide, scared eyes that held an almost human-like desperation. "Oh my God," Mark muttered, instinctively crouching down. The sight of the injured creature triggered something primal within him, a mix of empathy and protective instinct. Sarah joined him at the doorway, her hands instinctively covering her mouth in shock. She exclaimed, stepping closer. Jake asked, his voice trembling with concern, his eyes locked on the fox. "Of course we can," Mark replied. He knelt down further, extending a cautious hand toward the animal. The fox flinched but didn't retreat. Sarah shouted to the kids, already filled with determination. The children scrambled into action, uncertainty fading into urgency. Mark carefully lifted the fox into his arms, feeling its small heartbeat against him as they rushed inside. Once they were safely back in the living room, the family sprang into action, their sanctuary transforming into a makeshift clinic. "We need warm water," Sarah said, grabbing a bowl from the kitchen. In the back of her mind, she was aware of the curious glances from the neighbors, who had emerged to witness the unusual scene unfolding. As Mark gently laid Finn, as they decided to name the fox, on an old blanket in the corner, anxiety and hope filled the air like a thick fog. The family gathered around, quick to assess the injuries. Mark murmured, inspecting it closely. He knew they had to act fast, every second counted. They worked quickly, using warm water and cloths to clean the wound. Finn whimpered and squirmed, but with each gentle touch, he seemed to relax a bit more, sensing that they meant no harm. "Just a little more, buddy," Mark whispered, his own heart racing for the tiny creature. They bandaged the cut with the care of a family tending to one of their own. The deeper they went into the task, the tighter the bond grew between human and animal, this vivid reminder of fragility that lingered in the air. Lily asked, her voice threaded with worry. "It has to be," Sarah replied, her eyes locked on the fox. As Finn settled on the blanket, the family shared a moment of exhausted relief. The air felt lighter, perhaps they had made a difference after all. The fox looked up at them, eyes now filled with a glimmer of trust. Outside, however, a different narrative was brewing. As the Johnsons tended to Finn, neighbors whispered in shock and disbelief. One neighbor scoffed, arms folded across her chest. Another countered, but it needed help. The discussion stirred tension, the juxtaposition of compassion and skepticism brewing just beyond the Johnsons' walls. Days turned into weeks as the family devoted themselves to Finn's recovery. They learned to create a routine, carefully monitoring his progress while also teaching their children the value of kindness and responsibility. Each day was met with new challenges, but the love they poured into caring for this animal heightened their family bond in ways they never expected. Finn began responding well to their care. He played with the children, chasing after small toys and curling up next to them in the warmth of the living room. The transformation was astonishing. It was as if joy had been brought alive in that little fox, and the Johnsons were overjoyed to witness it. But outside, the murmurs had shifted into resentment. More neighbors became concerned, armed with opinions. One shouted from the street as they mowed their lawn. Mark stood firm in his conviction, explaining their beliefs about wildlife. "He's not just a wild animal we're keeping as a pet. We'll release him when he's ready," he insisted. But with each new comment thrown over the fence, doubt tickled at the edges of his resolve. One crisp autumn afternoon, Finn's instincts began to re-emerge. As he explored the backyard, his body grew more relaxed. He chased butterflies and pounced on leaves, exuding a newfound confidence. The kids watched wide-eyed, cheering on their little friend. Shouted while Lily clapped her hands in delight. The family had managed to carve a little piece of happiness for Finn, his presence filling their home with warmth and laughter. Yet darker clouds began to gather amid the euphoria. One fateful night, with the wind howling loudly outside, Finn grew restless. He paced back and forth, growling softly as shadows danced across the backyard. Sarah wondered aloud, anxiety creeping into her voice. "He's sensing something," Mark replied, sensing the change in Finn. As Mark stepped closer to the door, he suddenly noticed movement outside, the unmistakable shape of another fox, dark and sleek, lurking at the edge of their yard. Finn froze, a tense stillness gripping him as he stared out into the dark. Jake asked, worry creeping into his expression. "Not yet," Mark replied hesitantly, but then Finn darted toward the door, scratching at it with urgency. His instincts were clearly taking over. The call of the wild had grown louder, reverberating through his very being. With a rush of adrenaline, he whined, urging them to open the door. "Maybe we should," Sarah whispered, her heart aching at the thought of holding Finn back from his true nature. Behind them, the house fell silent as a profound realization settled in. They had nurtured a wild spirit, one that belonged to the woods and not to their home. It felt like everything moved in slow motion as Mark stepped forward hesitantly, sensing the weight of the moment. Then, with a gentle push, he opened the door and Finn bolted outside, disappearing into the darkness like a flicker of light extinguished in the night. The Johnsons stood frozen, breaths caught in their throats. They had let him go, but could they really? The relief was tinged with despair. The following days were a haze of emotional turmoil. As they tried to adjust, each time they heard a rustle or a howl outside, their hearts raced, memories flashing before their eyes. What if they had made a mistake? What if he got hurt again? They braved the outdoors, calling Finn's name, hoping for a response, but the woods remained silent, the darkness swallowing their hopeful cries. Days passed, and the house felt emptier without his playful presence, the laughter now a haunting echo. But then, just as their hope began to wane, one morning they awoke to something incredible. Loud, joyful barks echoed through their front yard. The family rushed outside, hearts pounding as they were met with a sight they would never forget. Finn stood proudly at their doorstep, but he wasn't alone. He was flanked by a group of wild foxes, sleek and wild, their eyes glimmering under the morning sun. "Look," Lily yelled, joy erupting. But as the family enjoyed the moment, a nagging thought pulled at the edges of Mark's mind. This was amazing, yes, but it also signified change. The wild call had returned, accompanied by wild companions. The neighborhood, witnessing the scene unfold, began to whisper again. Someone muttered, casting glances filled with a mix of awe and worry. Mike knelt down, drawing closer to Finn. He called out, but as Finn approached, something flickered in his eyes, a blend of belonging and wildness that sent a shiver down Mark's spine. Was this how it was meant to be? Would Finn choose the wild over the love they had nurtured at home? With a bittersweet heart, the family felt the thrust of inevitability. Customs and boundaries were being rewritten right before their eyes. And there they stood in a now familiar backyard, surrounded by both love and uncertainty, as the line between domesticity and the wild blurred further. The tension hung like a storm cloud above them, questions lingering in their minds. What would happen next? Could they keep him? Would he choose to stay with them, or was the call of the wild too strong to ignore? The answers seemed just out of reach, swirling in the summer air. And as the shadows stretched long beneath the luminous sun, the Johnsons were left standing on the precipice of change, their hearts racing, filled with both hope and uncertainty, wondering what the next chapter of their story would hold.